what's up, y'all? So I got something really great to talk about today, and it's something along the lines of nutrition and training and trying to achieve a certain goal, and specifically this elusive, mysterious goal of putting on muscle and losing fat at the same time. So this was inspired by a question in our community, which by the way is freaking amazing, by a really good friend, Natasha. And Natasha asked in a post that, you know, in the past she's always done these diets for weight loss specifically, and thanks to what she's learned through the SHT, she knows how to read labels, she knows what things to avoid, and she feels really good. By the way, she looks amazing. I've seen her lose a lot of weight. She feels like her digestive system is really solid now. And now she's transitioned over to a new way of training. She's doing some more strength training, and she wanted to know, is there anything that she needs to do different? Because in her research, she's come across this idea that she needs to go against our current plan of skipping breakfast, 2 meals a day, no snacking, moderating carbs, to moving towards 3 meals a day and 2 snacks, which is basically, you know, the old paradigm of eating every 2 or 3 hours, and incorporating some specific snacks here to stay compliant. Okay, so I appreciate this question because there's so much great discussion that can come out of this, and I've got some notes here just so I stay on track. And I'm going to intuit some things out of what she asked. And Natasha, if I'm not completely getting it accurate, I apologize. And at the same time, what I'm pulling out of your question there, I think it's going to be really useful for other people. Again, this is the ever elusive goal of gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time. I mean, when you think about it, it's what everybody wants when they embark on a nutrition program, right? Or a nutrition and fitness program. And it sounds like the thinking is, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like the thinking is in the wording of that question that the more exercise, the better. Because then I came back and I asked her to clarify, what's the new training program? What is it that she wants to get out of it? And when I asked her that question, she went through, you know, there's 4 days of strength training, an hour a day, there's a couple days of cardio, and then, you know, of course she wants to lose some more body fat, and she wanted to change things up, you know. And I was talking with Rich this morning as we were working out, and to me, it's interesting to see people go on this journey. And a lot of people get exposed to real food through the SHT. They embark on this journey. They see a lot of great changes, some things shift. And at some point in this journey, all of a sudden they feel like they need something different or something drastic to make things happen faster. And one thing, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily you, Natasha, I'm saying this is just what I see with people in general, and it's normal, it's natural, it's inadvertent. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this. But it's like, what we want for people is for them to understand that this is a way of life for a lifetime. This is a general framework, and within this general framework, there's a lot of ways to customize and experiment and fine-tune so that you're constantly seeing progress. But let's just pretend that all you did was stick to the basics of real food, eating 2 times a day, moderating your carbohydrate intake, making sure it's from real food sources. Let's say that you just did that for the rest of your life. You would continue to lose weight, continue to feel great, your digestion would continue to get better, you'd continue to learn about yourself, and it would be a constant progression. But it's not going to stay just like that, because within this realm of real food, we're always experimenting, we're facilitating experiments, you're asking a question, now you're going into some new training, and maybe that dictates a little bit of some changes. But what I just want to make this plug for, in general, you don't need anything different. You just need to dial in the basics. We see this over and over and over again. When I say you, I'm not talking to you, Natasha. I'm saying the rhetorical, euphorical you. You just need to dial in the basics and stick to it for a lifetime. It is better to stick to something that you can do for a lifetime than it is to try to commit to something that's very crazy and neurotic and restrictive for some temporary results or some temporary changes. Because what's your fallback going to be? That's the big question. And that's why we love our way of doing things. We feel like it is a very solid, it makes sense, and it's doable for a lifetime, and therefore you're going to constantly see progress. Now, you might not see it as fast as you want to see it if you were to get into some extreme something, you know, but we're not looking for extreme, and we're not looking for fast. We're looking for cumulative, and we're looking for subtle, and we're looking for long term. Okay, so let's so now we're going to get into several discussions here, and I think this is going to be really useful for all of us. What is it that we all want when we come into a nutrition program or when we embark on some new training, right? What is it that we want? We want to look good, whatever that means to us, right? For most of us, it means some fat loss. For some of us, it may mean some muscle gain. But in general, we want to look good. I think that is one of the biggest drivers for all of us that do this, is how it makes us look. Now, we'd say that a big reason for that is because the way someone looks is representative of their health. So it's one indicator for health among many other indicators, and it just so happens to be something that's important to all of us. We want to look good and feel good to ourselves in the mirror, in our clothes, but we also want to look good and feel good according to the way that we feel like we're being perceived by others. So we acknowledge that's very, very important to all of us. Of course, a lot of us want better performance as an athlete, and then I think most of us would acknowledge that we want long-term health, quality of life. We want to age gracefully and not be under the care of the medical system to the best of our abilities, and not be a burden to other people as we get older to the best of our abilities. So I feel like a key concept to understand here is that at some point it has to be what's best for health, not what's best for my short-term performance, or not what's best for my short-term quick fat loss or muscle gain or whatever those things are, right? And I think it's fine to go through experiments to see how things shift, but I feel like the older I get, the more my mentality is towards what's optimal for health, and it just so happens to be also what's optimal for my body composition and the way that I look, feel, and perform. But I just want to make a plug for having this mentality about, like, it's really about what's best for health, not how do I lose weight and how do I gain muscle, because there's a lot of ways that we can do that, and they're not healthy, and they will give us results. But what we're looking for, again, is something that's livable for a lifetime, that we can see constant progress, even though it's a little bit slower and more subtle than what we'd like. That's ideally what we're looking for. So now let's bring it back to, what is this frame of reference that we're speaking of? The purpose of real food to us in the SHT community, remember, is we're eating for nutrients, we're eating nutrient-dense foods, and we're also eating in a way that facilitates metabolic flexibility. All right, that's our two main fallback goals. We're eating for nutrients, and we're eating in a way that nurtures metabolic flexibility and fat burning. And so within our realm of real food, one of the main rules we have is when we consume carbohydrates, they need to come from real food sources in smaller amounts. And if we're doing that, then we're relatively lower carbish compared to the standard American diet, but we're still having the best of all worlds. We're having some carbs. As an athlete, that's important because it helps us replenish our glycogen stores. It helps us feel better and perform better. But it's also, because it's in moderated amounts, it's not the dominant energy source that we're trying to train the body to use. So the body still has this ability to use fat for fuel, and at the same time still have some carbohydrates. Also in our world, we acknowledge, like, the purpose of stored body fat is it's energy. It's an evolutionary adaptation to starvation. The purpose of stored body fat is energy for when we're not eating. Therefore, we have to embrace periods of space. And this is why Natasha comes to us and says, I may have to change from skipping breakfast 2 meals a day to eating more often. And so we're going to address these different points here. So the first thing that I want to address is, I'll just make sure in my mind that we covered what I wanted to with our basics. So what we're saying with our basics is we're eating real food, we're being strategic with our carbs, and we're allowing space in periods of not eating. And this facilitates metabolic flexibility, and it gives the body what it needs by eating for nutrients, okay? So, and I think that's the perfect formula for everyone, no matter what your goals are, because your goals always boil back to looking good, feeling good, optimal performance, and optimal health. I don't think there's anything outside of that people have goals. That people have as goals. If you got a rare condition, autoimmune situation, like, that's a health related thing, right? We all want to look, feel, and perform our best. So let's talk about the first thing that came up in that question, which is research, right? So proposed research, she said, I've been doing research. So, and in saying that, she's saying abandon current morning fasting and no snacking, and replacing it with 3 meals per day, with 2 snacks, which is basically the old way of doing things of eating every 2 or 3 hours. So there's some assumptions that we can pull out of that, I think, and if I'm incorrect, it's still going to make some good discussion points. The first one is that fasting is not good for building muscle. And the second one is that eating more often is better for muscle gain and better for performance. And eating more often burns more fat because, again, we're coming back to, we want to lose some body fat, we want to increase our muscle size, or our muscle mass, and we're moving away from eating less often to eating more often, okay? So those are the assumptions that we're pulling out of that question. Again, fasting is not good for building muscle, eating more often is better for muscle gain, and eating more often burns more fat. So let's first dissect, what do we mean by researching? When I say that I've been researching, when any of us say that we've been researching, usually that means we've been Googling. So reading scientific literature is kind of challenging. But I first want to just emphasize, like, when we Google something, we have to understand that what we're getting from Googling is a lot of different perspectives. And just like we've seen with our way of eating, which is very relatively controversial compared to the mainstream. Now, it's not controversial at all in the ancestral health realm, in the low carb, keto, Weston A. Price, primal, paleo health realms. That's not, I mean, this is the way to do things, right? It's like it's just a common understood. But if I go and I Google, let's say, and you can do this right now, put the video on pause, go and Google the best diet for cardiovascular health, the best diet for heart health, the best diet for cardiovascular disease. You're going to pull up a lot of crazy stuff, and a lot of it's not going to jive with what we teach because it's conventional wisdom. It's what's wrong with most of the information that's put out there. And you can do this experiment with any topic. Just Google any topic and see the variety of results that you get. This is why we feel like one of the biggest problems for most people as far as implementing a good nutrition program is because of misinformation. There's just too much information. We have access to too much information. We research. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with researching. You got to do it. You got to go out and look for stuff, but you have to figure out how to figure out what is the best stuff to pay attention to and what's not. And that's kind of tricky. So Googling pulls up a lot of different things, right? Googling usually pulls up mainstream conventional wisdom advice. And what we've seen with our nutrition and with the way that we live our lives in general, mainstream conventional wisdom advice is usually not correct. And it's almost as if you want to do the opposite of what you see as far as mainstream conventional advice. Unless what your Google results pull up some results that are in the ancestral health realm, then a lot of times that's going to be probably something along the lines of what we'd agree with. So now, Googling, you can pull up all kinds of different information. You may get it right, you may not get it right. If you read a book, especially if it has a lot of references and resources and it's a methodology that has a good track record, that's stepping in a better direction, I think. And so a lot of what we teach and experiment with is based off of the work of other people, the books of other people, the research of other people, all right? What we're proposing isn't necessarily new, although I feel like the way that we pull it together is unique in our own. The information and the concepts and the principles, like, we glean from learning from other people. So I think reading books can be a lot more beneficial than just Googling. I'm not saying you're not going to get some accurate information Googling, but reading books is going to be a little bit more, I think, solid and accurate, depending on what the book is. And then reading scientific literature can be the best thing, but it's also very tricky. So I just want to take a moment and just highlight an article that I read years ago by Chris Kresser, and it was titled "How to Read Scientific Literature." How to read and understand scientific research, and he goes through this process and talks about the different types of studies, and short-term, long-term studies. Is the methodology a strong methodology? Is it done in vitro and vivo? Do they use surrogate markers or endpoints? Absolute risk versus relative risk, and all these things. When you start to learn about this stuff, it starts to make you understand that most of what we've been told for most of our lives is not really research. It's epidemiological, it's observational, and it's what's wrong with most of what people think is the right thing to do, because they're doing the wrong thing based on this flawed information. So just learning about how to read and interpret scientific literature is an eye-opening process. So I'm going to share the link to this article here. He talks about some things to look out for when reading articles. Do the citations support the claim? A lot of times there's an abstract or a summary of this scientific paper, and the citations don't match what is being pulled, what they're theoretically pulling out of this research. A lot of times the authors might infer some kind of causation from correlation, and as we already know, correlation does not equal causation all the time, although a lot of what we're doing when we Google and we look for things to support what we think it is that we believe in, that's kind of what we're doing anyway, but you just have to take that with a grain of salt. Also, he mentions, was the research funded in any way? And a lot of times when you find the funding sources, it starts to become very clear why they come to the conclusions that they come to. So scientific literature can be awesome. It can be fascinating. There's I forget what the Google version is of PubMed, but there's a lot of things that you can look up in the scientific literature, but then you have to take the time to try to understand what it actually means and whether it's some good research to base some opinions off of or not because of funding sources and some of the stuff we just talked about, all right? Now, so what I'm talking about here is when Natasha says I've been researching, what does researching mean? Usually it means Googling, okay? So we just got to understand that we're pulling up a lot of different information when we Google. A lot of it's conventional wisdom, some of it may not be. I'm not saying that it's all wrong because you're gonna find some of our stuff on there. You know, you're gonna eventually Google and you can find our website, right? So it's like, you just have to have this awareness that you're getting a lot of information from a lot of different perspectives, and it can be very, very confusing and overwhelming. I think the most powerful thing, in addition to reading books and maybe getting into the literature, is your personal experience. What is your personal experience saying to you? What is your gut telling you about the information that you've learned that has transformed your life so far? I think that is more beneficial than any research that you could possibly do, or you can use the research to confirm what it is that you feel and experience, or vice versa, okay? So again, as some examples, I want you to go Google heart healthy diet, weightlifting diet, Google best diet for muscle gain, and see what the results are that you pull up. And chances are the majority of it, especially in the nutrition realm, is going to be completely opposite from what we recommend people do. All right, but we're not stopping there. We got some more information here. So when you look into best diet for weight training or muscle gain, you're usually going to see some stuff around eating for certain body types, right? Ectomorph, endomorph, mesomorphs. Been there, done that. Maybe even some blood type dieting, and then also like you get into these arguments about how much protein you should be eating, how many grams of protein per pound of body weight and per day, and you can only assimilate a certain amount of protein in each sitting, and that's why we need to space things out. You're going to burn more fat if you space things out. There's just arguments for pre-workout, post-workout. It starts to get really freaking neurotic, okay? And this is why one of our values in what we do is it's simplicity and elegance, all right? We avoid complexity and neurosis. We opt for simplifying processes so that we can make this work for a lifetime. And we also trust in our body's innate intelligence that it can do a lot more than we give it credit for. When we start to think that we need to baby the body, or that the body isn't smart enough to figure some things out, I think that's where we also run into some problems. And again, I'm not implying or inferring. A lot of this discussion is coming out of those questions, and Natasha probably has just the perfect, very healthy mindset around all this, but it's facilitating some really good discussion, all right? So let's talk about what is fitness. What is fitness? Fitness should be this ability to, I like the way that Greg Glassman and the CrossFit community put it. If you had this hopper with a bunch of random movements and exercises and durations and time domains and intensities and all this stuff, like you would be able to pull some random something out of that hopper and do it at a moment's notice. That is what good fitness should be, general preparedness. And if you are somebody that is generally prepared, meaning that you can lift and you can move and you can run and crawl and climb and push and pull and all these things, that creates the kind of body that we all want, because it's an indication of general preparedness and capacity. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with lifting weights. We all lift weights to some degree, but if you only lift weights, then if you just lift weights, then you're only going to be fit to lift weights, all right? That's the bottom line. If you only specialize in one area, then that's the area that you get good at, but you don't get good at anything else. So isolation, we don't believe to be true fitness, like, leg curls, leg extensions. Not saying there's not a benefit to that, because we do some of that stuff in here in combination with a lot of functional fitness. But if you're not a specialized athlete, your training should be aimed at keeping you healthy and prepared for the variety of challenges that life throws at you, versus trying to specialize in something. And I know this is hard for a lot of us to grasp and actually want to embrace, especially when we're younger, because we want to get good at these specific things. We want to have a heavy back squat. We want to get into a certain number of pull-ups. Whatever those goals are. And I think those are great because they're driving us to produce some more effort in those directions. But I think we want to think in terms of being generalized versus specialized, because that is going to, if we bring it back to what it is that we want to look, feel, and perform our best and have good health, then being generalized is going to facilitate an amazing looking body and a healthy functional body. All right, so there's general physical skills that I think most people would agree on, you know, endurance and stamina and strength and flexibility and power and speed and coordination, agility, balance, accuracy. CrossFit's covered this many times. That's general preparedness. To get there, we would say you just need to be constantly active, all right? Constant activity means that the majority of your day you're on your feet, you're doing something, you're walking, you're active, and then you have some intense resistance a few times a week, maybe, you know, I think 3 days a week is actually a really good sweet spot. And then you have this metabolic conditioning or intense cardio pushing, you know, kind of exercises or workouts, and maybe doing that a few times a week, right? So you got some heavy strength training a few days a week, some intense metabolic conditioning a few days a week, and then you mix all that up so that you're varying the movements that give you that stimulus. I think that's the perfect idea of fitness right there, right? The perfect way to do it. And that's why I love working out here at the CrossFit Combine, because I don't have to think about it. I just show up and do the workouts, and I trust my best friend and my fitness mentor, Colby Phillips, to put it all together for me. So so let's come back to, you know, what is it that we need from a fitness perspective to make us fully functional and generally prepared? We need body weight movements. We need to master the body weight movements, all right? So we're not talking about strength training just yet. We need to be able to have a perfect air squat, a deep air squat, a pull-up, a push-up, a sit-up, a handstand would be awesome. So those are great body weight movements. And then we also want to be able to carry things. So what does that mean? That usually means doing a deadlift, a proper deadlift. Here's where we're getting to some strength training type stuff, some weighted back squats, some weighted presses. That would make you very functional. And then also, to combine all that together, we want to do some fun activities, you know, like cycling and bike riding and running and swimming and rowing and some obstacle courses and you know, I love the Tough Mudders and the what do you call those things? Whatever the things are, they're like Tough Mudder, right? So those are all great, putting it all together. So our bodies are meant to be challenged in a lot of different ways, and if we can focus on mastering those body weight movements, mastering some strength things, and then figure out how to mix those up in different combinations and patterns with varying times and varying intensities, and all the while maintaining form and consistency in our form, then we think that that's the perfect recipe for health, and that's why we love the work that we do here at the CrossFit Combine, because we don't have to think about that. Colby puts it together, and that's exactly what we're doing here, okay? So now let's acknowledge what fitness does. So fitness does not burn calories. That's not what it does. I know that a lot of us think that fitness burns calories, so I want to take us through a little bit of information here that I think is very useful for all of us to hear. Fitness makes us capable, and fitness helps us with metabolic flexibility and efficiencies inside the body. It does not burn calories, and it does not burn fat. You can try this out for yourself by going for an hour run or doing a marathon, and just notice if any fat melts off your body permanently. The next day, you're right back where you were, all right? So fitness is not meant to counter calories, and if we can agree on that, which I'm not sure if we can yet, so I'm going to take us through some info here, but if we can agree on that, then we can start to understand that maybe we don't need to work out so much, because it's not about burning calories, it's about training the body to be capable. So there's some really good research done by Joel Jameson. I'm going to reference his website, 8weeksout.com. He's got some articles where he goes through some of this research, and then you can cross-reference the research that he cites there. And so the newest and latest and current understanding is that we expend a certain amount of energy in any given day, and if we're moderately active, then that is the same amount of energy we're expending if we're like intensely active, all right? So if I'm moderately active and I work out most days, if I do a 1 hour workout or if I do a marathon, it's not gonna change how much overall energy I'm expending and calories that I'm burning. And I know that's kind of weird to get your mind around, but if you go through and read this information and the research here, it's like really, really compelling, because it's very, very accurate. So the old model used to be this, what they called an additive model, meaning that you have a certain level of physical activity, and the more that you add on top of it, the more calories you're burning, and therefore the more, theoretically, maybe the fat that you're burning off your body. And now what we understand is that it's not. There were some experiments done measuring the overall metabolic activity of rats, and for sedentary rats, of course, there wasn't a whole lot of expenditure, but when it came to moderately active versus really highly active rats, the total energy expenditure for the day was identical. So, which means that the more active someone is past a moderate level, there's something that the body is compensating with. And we've done this now with human studies. This is now known as the constrained model. All right, so the constrained model of fitness basically says that at a certain, once past that sedentary level of activity, if you're moderately active most days, then the more activity that you add does not mean the more calories that you burn. It means that you're pulling that energy expenditure from something else that you otherwise would be using it for. So let's talk about what the different areas are that the body might be using for energy expenditure. The brain uses a lot of energy. It is the most metabolically demanding organ of the entire body. So the brain takes up a lot of energy, your vital functions take up a lot of energy, your fitness and stress take up a certain amount of energy. We would say that those are both grouped together because fitness is a stress, mental and emotional stress is a stress, it's a fatigue on your body. All of us know this. You go through some stressful time periods and you notice that you're just wiped out from it. And then it takes a certain amount of energy dedicated towards recovery and adaptation. Believe it or not, those are processes by the body. So I have this total amount of energy that I can spend on my brain function, my vital functions, which to a large degree, those can't get compromised or else we die. And then we have our fitness and our stress, and we have our recovery and adaptation. So if I start to increase my fitness and stress in an effort to burn more calories, now understanding that I'm not burning more calories, I'm compensating somewhere else. Where am I compensating? I'm compensating in my recovery and adaptation. And this is what we see happen with people that start to push the limit with working out too much, too often, too intense, is that although you think that you're doing a lot of training and beneficial strength stuff for your body and conditioning and burning more calories, what's happening is you're actually shrinking the amount of recovery and adaptation that you can have. And so what I have learned painfully over the past few years, again at the guidance of Colby, and he's proof of it, and a lot of the other athletes that are top performers here are proof of it, is it's almost like the more rest you get, the better. I like to show up most days in here and do the workouts because I like to be a leader and an example. But I've also noticed that I can show up and do a workout and not do it intensely, or maybe mimic the movements and have a recovery day where I'm just kind of going through the motions of it during the warm-up and then I take the day off. So I found I have to have 2 or 3 days of not doing anything in order for me to really recover properly, okay? So the big takeaway point from this is that we want to eat for nutrients and we want to train the body how to be metabolically flexible, and we also want to understand that excess working out is not burning calories, probably not doing what we think it's doing. We want to just understand that we want to be capable, we want to be generally prepared, we want a certain component of strength, we want some conditioning, but you don't want to overdo it either, because you need to, the workout is not where your body is building its adaptation, it's in the recovery to the workout that it's building its adaptation and it's strengthening itself and it's building the muscle, and then it happens outside of the gym. So again, 3 days a week of strength, 3 days with conditioning, maybe those are done in the same workout with a combination of different movements. What we've noticed is that the more you exercise, the more you're going to compensate your diet. And so what we usually recommend people do is just let your nutrition follow your training, because your training is going to dictate your appetite. And remember, we want to commit to something that is doable for a lifetime that we can do and also live our lives and not be obsessed with constantly training and working out. I think an hour of power a day, most days, whether you're coming in and doing something light or something stressful, is the way to go. And having a good balance of movements, all right? So let's come back to this assumption of abandoning current morning fasting and no snacking, replacing it with 3 meals per day and 2 snacks, which is basically eating every 2 or 3 hours. Something important for us to understand is that when you eat, you stimulate insulin. In the presence of insulin, you are not burning fat, you are storing nutrients and you are storing fat. It's impossible to burn fat. And so we have to have this understanding that if I want to lose body fat, I have to have periods of not eating. This is why the eating every 2 or 3 hours methodology is going to completely derail those efforts, because you are building insulin resistance by eating more often in the day. So if I eat a breakfast and a snack and a lunch and a snack and a dinner and a snack, then I am giving my body it's too much frequency of meals, too much frequency of insulin secretion. I may see some short-term results from that, but I'm doing metabolic damage to my body. Eating is a process, digestion is a process, and so just like healing and recovery are processes, we need to give the body some space. All right, so healing and recovery do not happen during digestion and during eating. They happen when we have some space and we're void of stress. And so we have to have periods of space. So this is part of what brings us back to an argument of, yes, it's perfectly fine to fast when you're doing some strength training. This is, we have this assumption that fasting is going to be bad for building muscle. So I want to take you into, or that fasting deprives the body of nutrients or depletes the body of nutrients, and that eating more often is going to be better. So what's the argument for eating more often? It's going to burn more calories. You're going to consume more food maybe. The body isn't efficient at assimilating as many nutrients in 1 or 2 meals as it is 3 to 6 meals. Well, we know that this is not accurate because if you look at the work of maybe Dr. Fung, he's got several books that are amazing. The Complete Guide to Fasting, the Obesity Code, I think it's the Diabetes Code. A lot of studies, recent studies demonstrate that fasting is actually extremely beneficial for muscle and nutrient preservation. All right, so just one example I pulled from his book. In one study, fasting every other day for 22 days. That's not eating for an entire day and then letting yourself eat the next day. For 22 days, there was no starvation mode. All right, you had fat oxidation, which is basically burning fat for fuel. Went up 58%. Carbohydrate oxidation decreased 53%. And your body switched over to this new fat-burning fuel source, and your body mass stayed exactly the same. In some situations, it increased. All right, this is alternate day fasting, which most of us are not going to do. That's pretty intense. So what we're saying here is that there's a difference between restricting calories and just going through periods of space, whether that's in the day or whether that's a day or 2 days or 3 days. Pure space is going to be beneficial for healing and muscle preservation because the body's priority in that space is recovery, and the body's priority in that space is creating energy. And in that space, the body has to tap into fat stores for fuel if you've been eating the way that we recommend, which most of the people listening to this are, okay? So we evolved to survive long periods without eating, and we store energy as fat for those purposes and for those time periods. And if muscle was being broken down in periods of starvation, we would not have made it as a species. This is what allowed us to thrive as a species, is this ability for, in the lack of presence of food and nutrients and energy, the body switches over to body fat for fuel, and it spares the muscle so that we can hunt another day and find an animal and kill it and eat it, okay? So if we did not preserve muscle mass when we were burning fat, then we would not have made it this far. And I think that's something very, very important to understand. In Dr. Fung's work, you can pull this up on his website. He's got a lot of scientific research, a lot of articles to associate with all this stuff that he talks about, and some of it's stuff that he's conducted and funded himself. So alternate day fasting for 27 days decreased body weight by 6%, fat mass decreased by 11.4%, muscle mass slightly increased. All right, that's crazy, right? Let's see, protein oxidation goes down the longer that you fast, meaning that you're always burning energy from a combination of fat, carbs, and protein. All right, the longer you go into space, the more the body prioritizes fat over protein, which makes sense because we want to spare the muscle that we have. So what we're trying to say here is to bring this back to, how do we make sense of this and implement it into this modern life and what we're trying to do? 80% of the results that you're looking for, body composition, health markers, better performance, come from this idea of how to train the body to be metabolically flexible, because when the body learns how to tap into fat stores for fuel, it is preserving and prioritizing muscle sparing so that we can fight another day, so that we can hunt another day. And so the more that we can train the body to be metabolically flexible, it doesn't really necessarily have anything to do with melting the fat off your body, although that does happen when the body learns how to use fat for fuel. What happens when we train the body how to be metabolically flexible is we teach the body to use fat for energy the way it's supposed to, and we teach the body to spare its muscle and to spare its nutrients the way it's supposed to. All right, this is what has made us successful as a species, and the more metabolically flexible we get, the better it's going to be for our health and for our training and for our muscle gain. All right, so let's come to pre-workouts, right? The theory behind pre-workouts is you give your body some nutrients so that you can top off your glycogen stores so that you can go into a workout and perform really well. Well, we'd say fasted training is the way to go because your body's priority is always topping off its glycogen stores. So glycogen is the storage form of sugar, of glucose. And so we're always walking around with stored glycogen from our muscles for muscle activity, unless we've been fasting for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days. So your body, every time you eat, the body's priority is topping off the glycogen and then putting a little bit of energy towards fat. And if you're metabolically flexible in the space in between meals, you're going to tap into your body fat for fuel and use that for energy. And you're bouncing back and forth between energy from food and energy from fat, energy from food and energy from fat, right? So, exercising while fasting actually enhances the body's ability to prioritize how to use fat for fuel and when to tap into your muscle glycogen for fuel. So if I eat before a workout, first of all, I'm giving my body a signal of nutrients, of food for fuel, and I want to teach my body how to prioritize internal energy creation. And then also I'm initiating some digestive process when I'm trying to work out. So the argument for pre-workout is it's an old school archaic way of thinking, and we know now, and I'll try to cite as much research as I can in this post, we know now that it is actually way more beneficial to go into a workout completely fasted, all right? Because your body prioritizes using nutrients and your body prioritizes using energy and creating energy in its own way. Now, what's the argument for post-workout nutrition? Well, after a workout, you're very insulin sensitive. And so, a lot of people think that if I have some food right after a workout, then that means that I'm going to do something with those nutrients, and I have this little window where I'm very receptive to nutrients, and if I miss that window, I'm not going to be able to use those nutrients. And what we found is for this to be false as well, because what happens especially if you consume carbohydrates right after a workout, you're kind of exacerbating this dependency on carbohydrates for fuel, and what we want the body to do is prioritize using fat for fuel because our bodies don't need help using glucose for fuel. All right, so I'm not saying that it's bad to have something to consume after a workout. I'm thinking that carbohydrates are probably not the best option because your body's always going to prioritize topping off its glycogen stores. If we do anything post-workout, then it would need to be something that's very easy to assimilate, and it would be focused on the things that the body needs for repair and recovery. And so what I recommend if you want to experiment with post-workout, it would be something protein and fat-based. And or fat-based. So think about what the composition is of our muscles. It's not just protein, it's a protein and fat matrix, right? So what I like to do most mornings is come in here and have a cup of stock and a scoop of collagen after my workout, and therefore I'm giving my body the nutrients that it needs to rebuild itself and to repair connective tissue. And we know from Dr. Fung's work that having a cup of stock and some collagen is not going to disrupt the benefits of fasting, and it's going to still enhance metabolic flexibility and fat burning. So I think something that we can do to give us a little bit of maybe some security or confidence that after a hard brutal workout we're doing something good for the body. If we want to experiment with post-meal workout, although it's not mandatory, you can do a cup of bone stock with some collagen. I think that would be a good little fix. But I do want to just share with y'all, when we first started all this stuff years ago, I mean this had to be like probably 6 or 7 years ago, Colby and I went through a whole month of training, brutal training sessions in the morning where we'd have metabolic conditioning and strength training. And I'm talking like Catalyst Athletic, like squat programs that were grueling, and conditioning. And we would purposely fast until the evening. We ate 1 time a day for an entire month and tracked our body composition and results. And our body composition got better, our strength and performance got better versus when we were doing post-workout meals, eating 2 or 3 times in a day. I'm not saying everybody needs to eat 1 time a day. What I'm saying is that it's not necessary to try to squeeze in a lot of meals post-workout, pre-workout, because the body, actually it seems like what happens when you create more space is the body gets really good at prioritizing using nutrients and pooling nutrients, and it gets really good at using fat for fuel and metabolic flexibility. So it's almost like, again, do everything opposite from what conventional wisdom tells us, because that's what gives us the best results. Think about let's talk a little bit about like how much, if you're curious about how much protein does the body need. I think a good rule of thumb, we talked about this in previous posts and podcasts and videos, about a gram per pound of body weight is good for the amount of meat that you need, okay? So understand that meat or animal foods is not just protein, it's a matrix of a lot of stuff. So if I look at some ground beef, it's not even, I think it's maybe a third of the ground beef is protein based and the rest is other nutrients and fat based nutrients and water weight maybe. So I think a good rule of thumb is for every pound, 100 pounds of body weight, to consume about a pound of meat, or about 0.75 pounds of meat. And if you're prioritizing animal foods, then you're giving your body exactly what it needs as far as a protein consumption standpoint goes. And then the rest of it's kind of filler. You're using plants and you're doing a little bit of carbs, a little bit of fruit. If you're prioritizing the meat and you're eating about a pound per 100 pounds of body weight, which for me that's about 2 pounds in a day of meat, which is about what I consume, then that's plenty for the body to work with, and you don't have to obsess again about eating every 2 or 3 hours, having 3 meals and snacks in between. The body does really well at pulling nutrients and resources whether you do 1 meal or 2 meals in a day. Okay, so I know that was kind of long. Was that about 40 minutes? So to bring it all back, what we recommend doing is finding a training program that you can stick with for a lifetime. Doing something that eventually leads to general preparedness, which means it's making you functional at body weight movements, at strength-based movements, at gymnastics-based movements, and it makes you better at activities and better at play. All right, that's a really good, well-rounded program. That's why we like the CrossFit methodology in general, and that's why we really love what's going on here at the CrossFit Combine, because Colby's taken all that into account. But if you're doing your own thing, your own strength training, that's awesome. I would also just make sure to emphasize that you're still working on your ability to pull-ups and push-ups and body weight type stuff, so that you have this very varied functionality. Okay, optimize your sleep. Sleep is where the majority of our recovery and recuperation happens. And so if you're training super hard and you're stressed out, but you're staying up late and you're getting up early and you're not sleeping well, that sleep period is where your body is healing and recovering and rebuilding itself. So the body composition changes that you want are coming from the training is shaping your body. The recovery is what is and when I say shaping your body, the training is shaping and building your muscles and your posture and your curves. And the sleep and the nutrition is the things that are burning your fat and giving you the nutrients that is possible for recovery. All right, so from a nutrition standpoint, what we'd recommend is focusing on eating for nutrients. That means eating the most nutrient-dense foods, and this is, we're talking about for fat loss and muscle gain. Focusing on making nutrient-dense foods a priority, meaning the animal foods need to be the first thing that you're consuming at most of your meals, so that you make sure you get all that in. I'd say about a pound of meat per 100 pounds of body weight is a perfect sweet spot. You can go up or down from that just a little bit. So you can kind of plan out your day around that. And then you're filling the rest of that with vegetables and greens and a little bit of starch and a little bit of fruit. We need to focus on metabolic flexibility. Again, if we're talking about all the things that we want to get from a nutrition and exercise program, body composition changes, performance changes, health markers, good health markers over time, enhancing metabolic flexibility and the body's ability to tap into fat stores, as we talked about, isn't just about body composition changes. It's about being optimal. It's about sparing muscle and helping the body rebuild its muscle and rebuild and recover, because it's able to use this really easy to use energy source that's on our bodies all day, every day, versus working hard for it, okay? Experiment with carb amounts. You know, if you're training, you're an athlete, I would definitely make sure to have a certain amount of carbs in per day. We usually recommend that people measure out their carbs to about 3/4 of a cup of starch and 3/4 of a cup of fruit per day. I think for most athletes, that's the perfect sweet spot. You don't need much more than that, but you can experiment with it. But I would definitely make sure that those are moderated compared to the nutrient-dense foods that you should be consuming. And then if I were to supplement, I would supplement with bodybuilding nutrients, meaning I would supplement with things that build and repair tissue. So collagen, organs, fat-soluble nutrients like vitamin A, D, and K. I'm a huge fan of supplementing with organs. We have a really great product line that we endorse and that we sell here. And I don't think you can do too much collagen. Like, it's just like so much of the body is made from that, and especially when it comes to your healing and recovery and recuperation, okay? So, Natasha, thank you so much for that question. It pulled a lot of great little points out that we were able to discuss, and I again want to make sure that I preface all this with these assumptions and these points are not necessarily what Natasha is thinking. It's just that her question spurred a lot of thought process. A lot of thought processes I thought everyone would benefit from, and keep those questions coming. And to answer your question, Natasha, do you need to change and move away from skipping breakfast and eating 2 meals a day? in replacement of something, of eating more frequently so that you can enhance your muscle gain and enhance your fat loss? And the answer is absolutely not. Don't change what's working for you. Keep doing what you're doing. And if I were to tweak anything in there, I would say just make sure that the most nutrient-dense foods, animal foods, are the priority, making sure you're getting collagen in there, making sure you're supplementing with some organs unless you're eating liver and stuff like that, and keep the questions coming, because this is where we learn a lot of information, okay?
All right, and then I want to add just one more thing. I want to make sure that I emphasize this very important point, okay, because we're really passionate about it. We want something that you can sustain for a lifetime, because that's what's going to give you results for a lifetime. And they may not come as fast as you want. They may be subtle, but they're cumulative over time, okay? What we want for everyone that comes to work with us is, and especially those people that are part of our community, is to understand that you don't need something different. You just need to commit and recommit to the basics. And when I say basics, I mean eating for nutrients, eating for metabolic flexibility, and always experimenting, staying within our framework of real food. And within that framework, you can do a lot of experimentation, but you don't need something different. You just need to really dial in those basics, because now, as we've learned, eating for nutrients is going to give you what you need to build an amazing body, and eating for metabolic flexibility, or training the body how to be metabolically flexible, is also going to give you the body that you want, because you start to spare and prioritize, you know, muscle and nutrient preservation and all the things that we've already talked about, okay? And by the way, if you look at some of the strongest, top performing athletes in our community, in this gym, we eat 1 or 2 times a day. We don't do anything different than what we're teaching, right? I may have a cup of stock after workouts in the morning. I may have a little bit of collagen in my coffee or something like that, but I usually eat 1 or 2 times a day. And I train really freaking hard, and I'm one of the strongest athletes here, and I'm one of the top performing conditioning athletes, and I'm not saying that to toot my own horn. I mean, I'm proud of it, being my age and everything. But what I'm saying is that there's a lot of people doing that, and we don't do anything different than what we're teaching. Most of us eat 1 or 2 times a day. We prioritize animal foods. We have a little bit of carbs from real food sources. We embrace metabolic flexibility and fat burning, and we let the rest of it work itself out. All right, we're not planning and stressing amounts and timings and all that other stuff, because that is not natural. That is not the way that we're meant to live. Okay. All right, thank y'all for letting me add in that little piece.